I always thought the disappearances in these mountains were just accidents until a Bigfoot spoke to me in English calmly, like it had practiced the words. That's when I realized those missing hikers hadn't gotten lost. They'd been taken. I went out tracking what I thought was the biggest bear I'd ever seen. Over 2,000 pounds based on the tracks and claw marks on the trees. I'm not a professional tracker, but I've been hunting these mountains for 15 years and I know what bear sign looks like. This was different. The prints were massive, deeper than anything I'd seen before, pressed into the earth with a weight that seemed impossible. The trees looked like they'd been attacked by something with incredible strength. Bark peeled away in long strips, saplings snapped clean through at shoulder height, claw marks that gouged into hardwood like it was soft clay. I was excited, maybe a little too excited. The hunter in me was fired up, imagining the trophy, the story I'd have to tell. I thought I was about to have the hunt of a lifetime. What I found instead changed everything I thought I knew about these woods, about what's possible in this world, about the very nature of reality itself. It was early October, that perfect time when the leaves are turning and the air has that crisp bite to it that makes you feel alive. The maples were showing off their brilliant reds and oranges, the oaks were deep russet and gold, and every gust of wind sent leaves spiraling down like colorful snow. I've been planning this hunt for weeks, ever since a buddy of mine told me about some unusual activity he'd noticed up in the northern part of the state forest. He's a wildlife photographer, spends more time in the woods than anyone I know. And he doesn't spook easy. He's seen mountain lions in these hills, been charged by a mother bear protecting her cubs, survived a close call with a moose during rutting season. None of that fazed him. But when he showed me the photos of these massive tracks and the way entire saplings had been snapped like toothpicks, trees as thick as a man's thigh just broken in half and tossed aside, I could see he was rattled. His hands were actually shaking when he handed me his camera to look through the images. That's when I knew this was something different, something worth investigating. I left the house before dawn while the stars were still out, and the world was wrapped in that deep blue darkness that comes just before sunrise. The drive took about 2 hours north, winding through back roads and eventually onto rough Forest Service roads that rattled my truck's suspension. I passed through small towns that were just waking up, gas stations with their lights on but no customers yet. Diners with steam rising from their vents as they prepared for the breakfast rush. Eventually, the towns disappeared entirely, replaced by endless forest on both sides of the road. When I finally reached the trailhead, the first pink light of dawn was just touching the eastern sky. The parking area was empty, which was exactly what I wanted. I don't like crowds when I'm hunting. Too much noise, too many people stomping around, scaring off the wildlife. And based on what I was tracking, I figured the fewer people around, the better. If what my friend had seen was real, if something that big and powerful was up here, I didn't want anyone else putting themselves in danger. I packed light, just my rifle, a good knife on my belt, a water bottle, a couple of granola bars and some trail mix, and my phone for emergencies. I wasn't planning on being out more than 8 or 9 hours. I figured I'd hike up to the area my friend had described, look around for sign, maybe get some photos if I found anything interesting, and be back at the truck by late afternoon. The first few hours were pretty standard. I followed a game trail that wound through dense forest, keeping my eyes on the ground for tracks, scanning the bark of trees for fresh markings. The morning sun filtered through the canopy in these beautiful golden shafts, illuminating patches of forest floor in shifting patterns as the wind moved the branches overhead. Dust motes danced in the light beams, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all was, how this was why I loved being out here away from civilization. Birds were singing their morning songs, chickadees and nuthatches mostly, with the occasional harsh call of a blue jay. I saw a couple of deer in the distance, does browsing on low vegetation, their tails flicking occasionally at flies. They caught my scent and bounded off with that effortless grace deer have, white tails flagging as they disappeared into the undergrowth. Everything felt normal, felt like a typical fall morning in the forest. There was no hint of what was waiting for me higher up the mountain. I found some bear scat that looked a few days old, black and full of berry seeds, typical fall diet for a black bear fattening up for winter. There were some claw marks on a pine tree, maybe 6 feet up, where a bear had been marking its territory, but nothing that matched what I was looking for. The claw marks were the standard 5-toed pattern. The spacing was right for a good-sized black bear, maybe 300 pounds. Nothing unusual. I kept moving, working my way gradually uphill, following ridge lines and game trails. My friend had said the unusual sign was concentrated in a specific area about 3 miles in, up near a rocky outcropping that looked out over the valley. Around 10 in the morning, I came across the first real sign. There was a fallen log, probably 3 feet in diameter. An old oak that had come down sometime in the past year, based on the condition of the bark. But something had torn it completely apart. I'm talking ripped to pieces, like something had just grabbed chunks of rotten wood and scattered them everywhere in a fit of rage or hunger. The bark was peeled off in huge strips, some of them 10 feet long, just torn away from the trunk and flung aside. The wood underneath was fresh, still damp, with that earthy smell of fungus and decay. This had happened recently, maybe in the last day or two. I knelt down and examined the area around it, looking for tracks or scat, anything that would tell me what had done this. Bears tear apart logs looking for grubs and insects. That's normal behavior. But they do it methodically, working their way along the log, digging and scraping. This was different. This was violence. The log had been demolished, attacked with incredible force. That's when I saw the print. It was in a patch of soft mud near a small creek that ran alongside the trail. The kind of creek that's really just a trickle this time of year, a few inches deep and maybe a foot wide. The mud there was perfect tracking mud, not too wet, not too dry, just soft enough to take an impression. And the print it had taken was enormous, easily 18 inches long and maybe 7 or 8 inches wide at the ball of the foot. It looked vaguely like a human footprint, 5 toes visible, an arch, a heel. But the proportions were all wrong. The toes were much wider spread than a human's, splayed out like the foot had been carrying tremendous weight over rough terrain. And the depth of the impression told me whatever made it was heavy, really heavy. The print sank nearly 2 inches into the mud, deeper than my boot would sink with my full weight on it. I'd seen big bear tracks before, seen grizzly prints in Montana that were 10 inches across, black bear tracks that were impressive. But this was different. The shape was all wrong for a bear, and there were no claw marks extending out from the toes. Bears have claws, always, and those claws leave marks in front of their toe prints. This print had none of that. I pulled out my phone and took a few pictures, kneeling next to the print and trying to get something in the frame for scale. I put my hand next to it first. My fingers barely spanned half the width of the print. Then I put my boot next to it, and it looked like a child's shoe in comparison. I took multiple shots from different angles, making sure I had good documentation. My heart was starting to pound now, that mix of excitement and unease that comes when you realize you're seeing something you can't explain. Part of me wanted to turn back, head to the truck, and show these photos to someone who'd know what to make of them, maybe a wildlife biologist or a ranger. But the other part of me, the part that had been hunting these woods for years, the part that had always scoffed at Bigfoot stories and thought they were all hoaxes and misidentifications, that part was curious. What could leave a print like that? What was out here? I decided to follow the tracks. They led away from the creek and up a steep slope that was covered in pine needles and loose rock. It was slow going, and I had to use my hands sometimes to pull myself up over the bigger rocks. The prints were harder to see on the rocky ground, but every so often I'd spot one in a patch of dirt or where the pine needles had been displaced. Whatever made these tracks was moving with purpose, taking a direct route up the mountain. About halfway up the slope, I started to get this feeling. It's hard to describe if you've never experienced it, but it's like the air pressure changes or something. The birds had stopped singing and the forest had gone completely quiet. Not the peaceful quiet from earlier in the morning, but an oppressive silence that made me stop in my tracks. I stood there for a minute, just listening, trying to figure out what had changed. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. At first I thought it might be thunder, but the sky was clear. Then I thought maybe it was a truck on a distant road, but we were miles from the nearest highway. The sound faded after a few seconds and the silence returned. I should have turned back then. Every instinct I had was telling me to get out of there, but I'm stubborn. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, that the quiet was getting to me. So I kept climbing. Near the top of the ridge, after another hour of climbing, I found more evidence. The forest opened up into a clearing, and the scene that greeted me was like something out of a nightmare. There was a whole area maybe 20 feet across, where small trees had been pushed over or broken off completely. Young pines and aspens, some of them as thick as my wrist, just snapped in half like they were nothing more than dry twigs. The breaks were fresh. I could see the white wood inside, sap still oozing from some of them. Other trees hadn't been broken but had been pushed over, roots torn partially out of the ground, leaning at crazy angles. Whatever had done this had done it recently, maybe within the last few days. In the center of this clearing, surrounded by the devastation, I found what looked like a nest or a bed. It was a big circular depression in the ground, maybe 6 or 7 feet across and a foot deep at the center, lined with pine boughs and dead leaves that had been arranged deliberately. This wasn't something that had formed naturally. Something had made this, had gathered materials and shaped them into a sleeping area. And it had been used multiple times. I could see that from the way the vegetation was matted down in layers, older brown leaves on the bottom, fresher green pine boughs on top. The smell hit me next. I'd been so focused on what I was seeing that I hadn't really noticed it at first, but now it was overwhelming. It was this musky animal smell, but unlike anything I'd encountered before. Not like a bear den, which has that distinct odor of bear, but also of earth and decay. Not like the sharp ammonia smell of a mountain lion spray. This was different, deep and thick, with notes of wet fur, and something else I couldn't quite identify. It was the smell of something large and living, something that had been here recently. The smell made my nose wrinkle and my eyes water slightly. It was strong enough that I could taste it in the back of my throat. I stood at the edge of this clearing, taking it all in. This was no bear den. Bears don't make beds like this, and they don't create clearings by pushing over trees. This was something else, something that had intelligence and purpose. I pulled out my phone again and started taking photos. The light was good up here on the ridge, and I wanted to document everything. I walked around the perimeter of the clearing, shooting from different angles, trying to capture the scale of it all. That's when the feeling hit me again, stronger this time, the sense that I wasn't alone. I stopped taking photos and just stood there, completely still, listening. The forest was still silent, but now I could feel it, the presence of something watching me. I slowly turned in a circle, scanning the tree line, but I didn't see anything. Just trees and shadows and the occasional flash of sunlight through the canopy. Then I saw movement. About 50 yards away, on the far side of the clearing, something shifted behind a thick cluster of pines. At first I thought it was a shadow, or maybe a deer moving through the undergrowth. But then it moved again, and I realized whatever it was big, really big. I froze, my hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung over my shoulder, but I didn't draw it. Something told me that would be a mistake. The Bigfoot stepped out from behind the trees, and I got my first clear look at it. My mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. It was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe more. The creature was covered in dark brown fur that was matted and thick, hanging in clumps in some places like it hadn't been groomed. The fur was longer on the arms and shoulders, maybe 4 or 5 inches, and shorter on the torso and legs. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, I could see the individual hairs moving slightly in the breeze. It walked on 2 legs with this fluid, purposeful gait that was eerily human-like, but somehow fundamentally different. Each step was measured and deliberate, the creature moving with the confidence of something at the absolute top of the food chain. But there was nothing human about its size or its proportions. The shoulders were incredibly broad, easily twice the width of a large man's, giving the creature a powerful, almost intimidating silhouette. The arms were long and muscular, hanging down past where the knees would be, the hands large enough that they looked like they could palm a basketball with ease. The head sat on a thick neck with almost no visible neck separation between the shoulders and the skull. The whole upper body seemed to flow together in one solid mass of muscle and bone. The Bigfoot wasn't looking at me yet. It was looking down at something on the ground, its head tilted slightly as if studying whatever it had found. I could see its profile, a heavy brow ridge, a flat nose, lips that were dark and leathery. The face had an oddly human quality to it, but also something ancient and alien. It reminded me of the reconstructions I'd seen of early hominids like Neanderthals or Homo erectus, but much larger and more robust, and I knew with absolute certainty that it knew I was there. It had known I was there from the moment I'd entered the clearing, probably before then. It was choosing not to acknowledge me yet, going about whatever business it had been engaged in. But every line of its body suggested awareness. This wasn't an animal that had been startled or surprised. This was an intelligent being that was making a calculated choice about how to respond to my presence. My mind was racing. This was a Bigfoot. It had to be. Nothing else could look like this, move like this. Part of me wanted to run, to turn and scramble back down the mountain as fast as I could, but I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot. I'd spent my whole life hearing stories about Bigfoot, about Sasquatch, and like most people, I'd written them off as myths, as misidentifications of bears or people in costumes. But there was no mistaking what I was seeing. This was real. The Bigfoot slowly raised its head and looked directly at me. Its eyes were dark and deep set, and there was an intelligence in them that sent a chill down my spine. We stood there staring at each other across the clearing, and for a long moment neither of us moved. Then the Bigfoot opened its mouth and made a sound. It wasn't a roar or a growl like you'd expect from a wild animal. It was more like a vocalization, a series of low, rumbling sounds that had a pattern to them, almost like language. The sounds were guttural and harsh, but there was a rhythm, a deliberateness that suggested it was trying to communicate something. I stood there, mouth open, completely stunned. The Bigfoot made the sounds again, louder this time, and I could see its mouth moving, its lips forming shapes around the sounds. Then it said something that made my blood run cold. Through the growls and the guttural vocalizations, I heard a word. It was raspy and distorted, like someone trying to talk with a throat full of gravel, but it was unmistakable. The Bigfoot said something that sounded like the word human. I couldn't believe it. This creature, this thing that wasn't supposed to exist, had just spoken to me. My hand was shaking as I slowly reached into my pocket. I didn't take my eyes off the Bigfoot, but I managed to find my phone and pull it out. I needed to record this. Nobody would believe me otherwise. I needed proof. I fumbled with the phone, trying to open the camera app without looking at it, keeping my eyes locked on the creature. It was still making those vocalizations, still standing there watching me with those dark, intelligent eyes. I got the camera app open and hit the record button, or at least I thought I did. The screen was hard to see in the bright sunlight, and I was shaking so badly I wasn't sure if I'd actually pressed it. I glanced down for just a second, just to check if the red recording indicator was showing. That was my mistake. The moment I looked down, the Bigfoot's demeanor changed completely. It let out a loud, angry roar that echoed across the mountainside and started moving toward me. Not running, but walking fast with long, purposeful strides that covered ground quickly. Its lips were pulled back, showing large, yellowish teeth, and its hands were clenched into fists at its sides. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. 1 second it had been making those almost conversational sounds, and the next it was charging at me with obvious aggression. I immediately stopped the recording, or tried to. I was hitting buttons randomly at this point, and looked back up at the Bigfoot. It stopped moving forward, just stopped maybe 20 feet away from me now, and the aggressive posture relaxed slightly. It was still tense, still watching me closely, but the immediate threat had passed. It knew. Somehow it knew what I'd been trying to do with the phone. It had understood that I was trying to record it, and it didn't like that. I stood there, phone hanging uselessly in my hand, and a thought went through my head that probably saved my life. My life is worth more than fame, more than proof, more than showing people that Bigfoot is real. What good would video evidence be if I was dead? I slowly put the phone back in my pocket, making sure the Bigfoot could see what I was doing. It watched me, those dark eyes tracking every movement. Once the phone was away, the Bigfoot's posture changed again. It took a step closer to me, and I had to fight every instinct not to run. Running would be fatal. I knew that somehow. This creature could cover ground way faster than I could, and if it wanted to catch me, there'd be no escape. So I stayed still, barely breathing, watching as the Bigfoot approached. When it was about 10 feet away, it stopped and started making gestures. It pointed to itself with one massive hand, tapping its chest several times. Then it pointed at me, the same deliberate gesture. It was establishing something, showing me that it recognized both of us as beings, as individuals. I just stood there, transfixed, not knowing what to do or how to respond. Then the Bigfoot reached out and grabbed a dead branch that was lying on the ground nearby. It was a substantial branch, maybe 3 inches in diameter and 4 feet long. The Bigfoot picked it up with one hand like it weighed nothing and held it up so I could see it clearly. Then, with what seemed like no effort at all, the Bigfoot snapped the branch in half, just grabbed both ends and broke it like a twig. The crack echoed through the silent forest. My face went pale. I felt all the blood drain out of it. The message was clear. The Bigfoot was showing me what it could do, demonstrating its strength. But what did it mean? Was it threatening me, saying it could break me as easily as that branch? My mind was racing through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I could feel my legs starting to shake, and I didn't know if I could keep standing much longer. But then the Bigfoot did something unexpected. It dropped the broken pieces of branch and started making more gestures. It pointed at me again, then pointed down the mountain, back the way I'd come. Then it made a pushing motion with both hands, a clear gesture that said, "Go." It repeated the gesture several times, each time more emphatic. Go. Leave. Get out of here. I understood then. The broken branch wasn't a threat against me, not directly. It was a warning. It was saying that danger was here, that something could break me, but it was also telling me to leave. It was giving me a chance. This Bigfoot, for whatever reason, was warning me to get out of its territory before something bad happened. The intelligence in those eyes, the deliberate communication, this wasn't just an animal protecting its territory. This was something more. I started backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on the Bigfoot. It didn't move, just stood there watching me go, occasionally making that same pushing gesture. Go, leave. I backed up maybe 20 feet before I felt safe enough to turn around. When I did turn, I started walking down the mountain, moving as quickly as I dared on the steep, rocky terrain. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to shove them in my pockets. Every few steps I'd glance back over my shoulder. The Bigfoot was still standing there in the clearing, watching me. It hadn't moved, hadn't followed, it just stood there, a massive dark figure against the trees, making sure I left. I kept walking, faster now, practically jogging down the slope. The rocks and loose dirt made it treacherous, but I didn't care. I just wanted to put distance between myself and that clearing. When I was about 100 yards down the mountain, I looked back one more time. The Bigfoot was gone. The clearing was empty. A wave of relief washed over me, and I stopped to catch my breath. My legs were burning from the steep descent, and I was drenched in sweat despite the cool October air. I leaned against a tree and tried to process what had just happened. I'd seen a Bigfoot, not just seen one, but communicated with one. It had spoken to me, or tried to. It had understood what I was doing with my phone. It had warned me to leave. After a minute of rest, I started moving again, walking this time, not running, trying to conserve my energy. I'm not in the best shape. Too many years of sitting in an office chair, too many beers on the weekends. I knew I couldn't keep up a fast pace for long. The important thing was to keep moving, to get back to the trail and then to my truck. I'd been walking for maybe 5 minutes when I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps, heavy footsteps, moving through the forest. But they weren't coming from behind me, from the direction of the clearing. They were coming from my left, from deeper in the forest. And they were loud, like something big was crashing through the undergrowth without any attempt at stealth. Then I heard more footsteps, from my right this time. These were different. Not as loud, but faster, moving with purpose. I spun around, trying to locate the sounds, and that's when I realized what was happening. There were multiple Bigfoots out there, and they were moving toward me. I couldn't see them yet, but I could hear them, could hear branches breaking and leaves rustling as they moved through the forest. Adrenaline hit my system like a lightning bolt. My exhaustion vanished, replaced by pure terror. I started running, really running, tearing down the mountain as fast as my legs would carry me. I didn't care about staying on the trail anymore, didn't care about the rocks or the steep grades. I just ran, crashing through brush and jumping over fallen logs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps behind me got louder. They were gaining on me, getting closer. I could hear them clearly now, could hear the heavy impacts of feet hitting the ground, the sound of something big moving fast through the forest. There had to be at least 2 or 3 of them, maybe more. They were coordinating, moving to cut off my escape routes. These weren't random animals, they were hunting me. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like they were on fire. I'm out of shape, way out of shape, and I'd already been hiking for hours before this encounter. I couldn't keep this pace up much longer. I stumbled over a root and nearly went down, caught myself on a tree trunk. The bark scraped my palm, but I barely felt it. I had to keep moving. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, my body gave out. I collapsed behind a large boulder, gasping for air, my vision starting to tunnel. I couldn't run anymore. My legs were shaking so badly I couldn't stand. I pressed myself against a rock, trying to make myself as small as possible, praying they wouldn't find me. The footsteps were all around me now. I could hear them moving through the trees, circling my position. They knew I was here. They had to know. I was making too much noise, breathing too hard. I tried to quiet my breathing, but my lungs were screaming for air. I closed my eyes and waited for whatever was going to happen next. Then the footsteps stopped. The forest went silent again. I opened my eyes and carefully peered around the edge of the boulder. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows. But then movement caught my eye. A Bigfoot stepped out from behind a thick pine tree, maybe 30 feet away. It was looking in my direction, and when our eyes met, I knew I was caught. I hoped desperately that it was the same Bigfoot from before, the one that had warned me to leave. Maybe it would recognize me, maybe it would let me go again. But as the creature moved closer, I realized it wasn't the same one. This Bigfoot was different. Bigger, with darker fur and a more aggressive posture. Its eyes weren't intelligent and cautious like the first ones had been. They were cold and predatory. Then another Bigfoot appeared, stepping out from behind another tree. This one was smaller than the first, but no less intimidating. It moved with a fluid grace that was terrifying in something so large. The two Bigfoots looked at each other, then back at me. They weren't making any vocalizations, weren't communicating in any way I could detect, but they were clearly coordinating, clearly working together. I tried to stand, to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I managed to get to my knees before they rushed at me. They moved impossibly fast for creatures their size, covering the distance between us in seconds. I threw my arms up to protect my face, but it was useless. One of them grabbed me by the shoulders, its hands enormous and impossibly strong. I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head, saw a flash of white light, and then everything went black. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the pain. My head was pounding and every muscle in my body ached. The second thing I noticed was the smell. That same musky animal scent I'd encountered at the nest site, but much stronger. It was overwhelming, making my eyes water. The third thing I noticed was that I couldn't move my arms. They were tied behind my back with something that felt like vines or thick grass, bound tight enough that my hands were going numb. I opened my eyes slowly, wincing at the throbbing in my skull. I was lying on my side on hard ground, and it was dark. Not pitch black, but dim enough that it took a few moments for my eyes to adjust. When they did, I realized I was in a cave. The ceiling was maybe 8 feet high at its peak, sloping down to about 4 feet at the walls. The cave was roughly circular, maybe 20 feet across, and the entrance was just a dark opening on the far side. Through the entrance, I could see daylight and what looked like a spectacular view. I could see treetops stretching out below me, layer after layer of forest canopy. I was high up, really high up, probably near the summit of one of the taller peaks in the range. From this vantage point, I could see for miles, all the way to the horizon where the mountains faded into blue haze. As I lay there trying to piece together what had happened, I saw movement near the cave entrance. Multiple Bigfoots were moving around outside. I counted at least 5, maybe 6. They were engaged in various activities. One was arranging branches and leaves near the entrance. Another was examining something it held in its hands. They moved with purpose and coordination, like a community going about its daily business. Then I saw them carrying something. 2 of the Bigfoots were supporting a third between them, carrying it carefully like injured humans would carry a wounded comrade. The one being carried had its arm hanging at an odd angle and seemed barely conscious. They brought it into the cave, and as they passed close to me, I got a better look. This Bigfoot was bigger than the others, with lighter brown fur that was matted with what looked like dried blood. They laid the injured Bigfoot down against the far wall of the cave, being surprisingly gentle with it. One of them left and came back with what looked like a bundle of moss and leaves, which it pressed against the injured one's arm. The wounded Bigfoot groaned, a low sound that echoed off the cave walls. It was clearly in pain. After they'd settled the injured one of the other Bigfoots turned and looked directly at me. I tried to stay perfectly still to pretend I was unconscious, but it was too late. The Bigfoot walked over to where I was lying and stood over me, looking down. I recognized it then. It was the same Bigfoot that had grabbed me, one of the pair that had caught me behind the boulder. Up close, its face was terrifying, all sharp angles and heavy brow ridges with those cold, dark eyes staring down at me. Then another figure appeared in the cave entrance, backlit by the daylight outside, so I couldn't see its features at first. But as it moved into the cave, I recognized it. It was the first Bigfoot, the one from the clearing who had warned me to leave. It walked over to where I was lying, and when it saw me awake and aware, its expression changed. It looked sad somehow, disappointed. It slowly shook its head, and the gesture was so human-like it made my skin crawl. The Bigfoot stood there for a long moment, just looking at me and shaking its head. Then it made a gesture, the same one it had made in the clearing. It pointed at itself, then at me, then it made that breaking motion with its hands, snapping an invisible stick. But this time the message was different. In the clearing, it had been a warning. Here, in this cave, surrounded by multiple Bigfoots, it was a statement. These Bigfoots would kill me. That's what the gesture meant. I was going to die here. Pure terror washed over me. I started screaming, begging, pleading with them. The words came out in a rush, incoherent and desperate. I was begging for my life, promising I wouldn't tell anyone, swearing I'd never come back to these mountains. The Bigfoots just stared at me, unmoved by my pleas. They couldn't understand my words, or if they could, they didn't care. One of the aggressive Bigfoots stepped forward and backhanded me across the face. The blow was devastating, snapping my head to the side and making my ears ring. Spots danced in my vision, and I tasted blood in my mouth. The world tilted and spun, and then everything went dark again. I was unconscious before I hit the ground. When I came to again, it was darker, not completely dark. There was still some light coming through the cave entrance, but it was the orange-red light of late afternoon. I'd been unconscious for hours. My face was swollen where I'd been hit, and the throbbing in my head had somehow gotten worse. I was also incredibly thirsty. My mouth felt like it was full of cotton, and my lips were cracked and bleeding. There were fewer Bigfoots in the cave now. Just 2 that I could see, including the injured one that was still lying against the far wall. It seemed to be sleeping or unconscious, breathing slowly and heavily. The other one was sitting near the entrance, its back to me, apparently on guard duty. I tried to work on the bindings around my wrists, twisting and pulling as quietly as I could. The vines, or whatever they were made of, were strong, but they had some give to them. I could feel them starting to stretch and loosen slightly, but it was slow work and painful. The bindings were cutting into my skin, and I could feel blood running down my hands. As darkness fell outside, the guard Bigfoot got up and left the cave. A few minutes later, it returned with another Bigfoot, and they carried something between them. What looked like a large bundle wrapped in leaves. They set it down near where I was lying, and the second Bigfoot opened the bundle to reveal a small pile of berries and some kind of tuber or root. The guard Bigfoot picked up a handful of berries and held them out to me. I was so hungry and thirsty I didn't even think about refusing. I opened my mouth and let the Bigfoot drop the berries in. They were tart and bitter, probably not fully ripe, but I didn't care. I chewed and swallowed, and the guard Bigfoot gave me another handful, then another. When the berries were gone, it offered me the root. I took a bite. It was fibrous and tasteless, but it had moisture in it, and that's all I cared about. I ate what I was given, knowing it might be the last meal I ever had. Later, another Bigfoot brought me some water in what looked like a large piece of bark that had been shaped into a crude bowl. The water was cold and tasted faintly of earth, but it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I drank it all, and the Bigfoot brought me more. After the second bowl, I felt a little better, a little more alert. The food and water had taken the edge off my physical suffering, but it did nothing for my terror. That first night was endless. I couldn't sleep, even though exhaustion was weighing on me like a physical thing. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow made me think they were coming to kill me. The Bigfoots seemed to sleep in shifts, with at least one always awake and on guard near the entrance. I could hear others moving around outside, their footsteps and occasional vocalizations echoing off the rocks. The days that followed blurred together into an endless nightmare of fear and hunger and cold. I lost track of time completely, couldn't tell if I'd been there for 3 days or 5 or a week. There was no way to mark the passage of time, no watch, no way to see the sun clearly enough to gauge its position. I tried counting the feeding times, tried to establish some kind of pattern, but the Bigfoots didn't seem to operate on any schedule I could discern. Sometimes they'd bring food twice in what seemed like one day. Sometimes there'd be long gaps where I got nothing. The Bigfoots kept me alive, but barely. They brought me small amounts of food and water twice a day, or what I assume was twice a day. The portions were never quite enough to satisfy my hunger, never enough to give me real strength. I was constantly hungry, constantly weak, my body slowly consuming itself for energy. My stomach had stopped growling after the first couple of days. Now it was just a dull, constant ache. I could feel my clothes hanging looser on me, could count my ribs through my shirt when I ran my hands over my torso. The muscle mass I'd built up from years of hiking and hunting was melting away, leaving me gaunt and skeletal. The cold was another constant torment. October nights at this elevation got down into the 30s, sometimes lower. I had only the clothes I'd been wearing when they captured me. A flannel shirt, jeans, boots, no jacket, no blanket. I spent the nights curled into a ball, trying to preserve body heat, shivering so hard my muscles ached. The Bigfoots didn't seem bothered by the cold. Their thick fur protected them. They slept peacefully while I lay there freezing, counting the hours until dawn when the sun would bring a little warmth back to the cave. Sometimes one of them would bring me a handful of pine boughs or dead leaves, dropping them next to me like they understood I needed insulation. I'd pile them over myself, but they provided minimal warmth, and the smell of decay from the rotting leaves was nauseating. The injured Bigfoot recovered slowly. Over the days, I watched as it gradually regained strength, going from barely conscious to sitting up to eventually standing and moving around the cave. When it was well enough to leave, 2 others came and helped it walk out of the cave. I never saw it again after that. As the days passed, I cycled through every emotion: terror, anger, despair, resignation. I prayed even though I hadn't prayed in years. I bargained with God, promising everything I could think of if He'd just get me out of this. I thought about my family, my friends, everyone I'd left behind without saying goodbye. I wondered if they were looking for me, if anyone even knew where I'd gone. I'd told my wife I was going hunting, but I hadn't been specific about where. The state forest was huge. They'd never find me up here. Eventually, after what I guess was a week or more, I gave up hope. I stopped trying to escape, stopped fighting the bindings. I just lay there on the cave floor, existing. I became convinced that the Bigfoots were keeping me alive for a reason. Maybe they were waiting for winter, when food would be scarce. Maybe they wanted fresh meat, and that's why I was still alive. The thought was horrifying, but in my exhausted, starving state, I almost didn't care anymore. I just wanted it to be over. One night, I was lying in the cave, drifting in and out of consciousness. Most of the Bigfoots seemed to be asleep, their heavy breathing echoing off the walls. There was one on guard duty near the entrance, as always, but this one seemed drowsy, nodding off occasionally before jerking awake. I heard footsteps approaching the cave, slow and careful. A shadow appeared in the entrance, blocking out the moonlight. For a moment, I thought it was just another Bigfoot coming to relieve the guard. But then I recognized the silhouette. It was the first Bigfoot, the one who had tried to warn me away, the one who had shown sadness when it saw me captured. The Bigfoot moved into the cave silently. It walked past the guard without waking it, moving with incredible stealth for something so large. It came straight to where I was lying and knelt beside me. In the dim light, I could see its face, and the expression there was urgent, almost desperate. It reached behind me, and I felt it tugging at the bindings on my wrists. After a few seconds of work, the vines came loose and my hands were free. The Bigfoot gestured toward the cave entrance, that same urgent pushing motion. Go, leave, now. I didn't need to be told twice. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't support me at first. I'd been lying in the same position for so long that they'd gone numb. The Bigfoot grabbed my arm and helped me up, steadying me until I could stand on my own. As we moved toward the entrance, the guard Bigfoot stirred. The first Bigfoot froze, and we both held perfectly still. The guard shifted position and then settled back down, its breathing deepening again. We waited for what felt like an eternity, then continued moving toward the entrance. Outside the cave, the Bigfoot pointed down the mountain. The moonlight was bright enough that I could see a rough path leading down through the rocks. The Bigfoot looked at me one more time, and I could see the risk it was taking. If the others found out it had freed me, they might kill it. This was incredibly dangerous for the Bigfoot, and it knew it. But it was doing it anyway. I wanted to say something, to thank it somehow, but there were no words. I just nodded, hoping it would understand. Then I started down the mountain path as fast as I dared. My legs were weak and shaky, and I nearly fell several times in the first few minutes. But adrenaline was flooding my system again, giving me strength I didn't know I had. Behind me, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a roar of anger from the cave. They discovered I was gone. I didn't look back, just started running, stumbling, and sliding down the rocky path. I could hear more roars now, multiple voices, and the sound of heavy footsteps. They were coming after me. I ran with every ounce of strength I had left. The path was treacherous in the moonlight, just loose rocks and steep drops on both sides, but I didn't care. I just ran, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. My lungs burned with every breath, the cold night air searing my throat. My legs screamed in protest, weak from days of captivity and lack of food. But I kept going. Every muscle in my body was on fire, but I pushed through the pain. I had to keep going. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit getting closer. Roars of anger, the heavy thud of feet hitting rock, branches breaking. They were coming after me, and they were fast. I ran faster than I thought possible. Fear giving me strength I didn't know I had. The moonlight cast everything in silver and black, making it hard to judge distances or see obstacles clearly. More than once I nearly went over the edge, catching myself at the last second, loose rocks skittering down into the darkness below. The path twisted and turned, sometimes nearly vertical, forcing me to scramble on hands and knees. and I could feel sharp rocks cutting my palms and knees through my jeans. Blood made my hands slippery, but I kept moving, kept pushing myself down the mountain. The path eventually leveled out and entered the forest. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face and arms. I could still hear them behind me, but the sounds were getting fainter. I was gaining distance. Or maybe they were just letting me go. Either way, I didn't stop. I ran through the entire night. I don't know how I did it, how my body held together. I should have collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. But somehow I kept moving, driven by pure survival instinct. When the sun started to come up, I realized I'd been running toward it, running east. That meant I was heading in the right general direction. The trailhead and my truck were somewhere to the east. As full daylight arrived, I finally slowed to a walk. I couldn't run anymore. My body had given everything it had, and there was nothing left. I stumbled through the forest in a daze, barely aware of where I was going. I just kept moving, kept putting one foot in front of the other. Eventually, I heard the sound of a car engine. I pushed through some brush and found myself standing on the edge of a gravel road. I'd made it out of the forest. I stood there swaying on my feet, barely able to believe it. A few minutes later, a truck came around the bend and stopped when the driver saw me. An older man got out, took one look at me, and immediately called for an ambulance on his cell phone. I spent 3 days in the hospital. I was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and covered in cuts and bruises. My wrists were infected where the bindings had cut into them. The doctors asked me what happened, and I told them I'd gotten lost in the woods, that I'd fallen and hit my head and wandered around confused for days. They seemed skeptical, but they had no other explanation that made sense. My truck was still at the trailhead where I'd left it. The police brought me the keys when I was released from the hospital. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except my rifle was gone. I'd been carrying it when the Bigfoots caught me, and I never saw it again. I haven't told anyone the real story. How could I? Who would believe me? I'd be labeled as crazy, as someone who'd suffered some kind of psychological break. So I keep it to myself, this secret that weighs on me every single day. But I think about it constantly, obsessively. It's invaded every part of my life. I think about that first Bigfoot, the one who tried to warn me when I first entered its territory, the one who showed mercy in the end by helping me escape from certain death. I wonder what happened to it after I got away, after the others discovered what it had done. I wonder if they punished it for freeing me, if they injured it or killed it or drove it away from the group. The thought keeps me up at night, fills me with guilt. That creature saved my life at great personal risk, and I have no way of knowing if it paid the ultimate price for that act of kindness. I wonder if the others knew it was responsible, or if my escape remained a mystery to them. Did they think I'd somehow freed myself? Did they search for me? Or did they know immediately that one of their own had betrayed them? These questions haunt me, and I'll never have answers to them. I think about the intelligence I saw in the Bigfoot's eyes, the clear understanding of what it was doing and the risk it was taking. That wasn't just animal instinct. That was a moral choice, a conscious decision to help someone even though it went against the Bigfoot's own interests and the wishes of its community. I'll never go back to these mountains. The thought of returning fills me with a dread so profound it makes my hands shake. I'm done hunting, done with the wilderness, done with the thrill of the chase and the satisfaction of the kill. None of that matters anymore. The experience shook me to my core in a way I can't fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. It wasn't just the terror of being captured, of facing death, of being held prisoner by creatures that shouldn't exist. It was the realization that Bigfoot is real, that these creatures exist and have their own complex society, their own rules and hierarchies and moral codes that we can't begin to understand. and we're intruding on their territory, pushing further into the wilderness every year, building roads and houses and developments, completely unaware of what's out there watching us from the shadows. We think we own these forests, think we have dominion over every living thing in them. But we're wrong. We're so arrogantly, dangerously wrong. Some of them are aggressive, territorial, willing to kill to protect their domain. But some of them, like the one that helped me, seem to have a capacity for mercy, for making moral choices that go against their own interests. That Bigfoot saved my life at great personal risk. It could have left me there to die, could have let the others do whatever they planned to do with me. But it didn't. It made a choice. I carry that with me every day. The memory of those eyes looking at me in the moonlight, the urgency of its gestures, the risk it took. I owe that Bigfoot my life. I'll never be able to repay that debt, never be able to thank it properly. All I can do is honor its sacrifice by keeping the secret, by protecting its kind from the human curiosity and greed that would inevitably follow if people knew the truth. Because I learned something up there in those mountains, something most people will never understand. We're not alone in these forests. There are other intelligences out there, other beings that deserve our respect and our distance. They were here long before us, and if we're smart, we'll leave them alone to live their lives in peace. The experience changed me fundamentally. I look at the world differently now, see it through new eyes. Every time I hear a story about Bigfoot, about Sasquatch sightings or mysterious tracks, I wonder. I wonder if those people had encounters like mine. I wonder if they saw the same intelligence, the same capacity for both violence and mercy. And I wonder if they're keeping their secrets too, carrying the weight of knowledge that the rest of the world isn't ready to accept. Sometimes late at night, I dream about that mountain. I dream about running through the forest, about the weight of those eyes watching me from the shadows. And sometimes, in those dreams, I see that first Bigfoot standing at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the moonlight, watching me escape to safety. In those dreams, I like to think it's watching over me still, that somewhere out there in those vast forests, it remembers the human it chose to save. And I hope, wherever it is, that it knows I remember too. That I'll always remember what it did for me, and that I'll keep its secret for as long as I live. For more interesting stories, check this out.